Hi, and welcome back to the panel room. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and this time we're going to be talking about the works that influenced our favorite authors. What brought them to start writing, what else has influenced their work, and what do we think might influence them next? So let's see who all is coming in to join this party. So Alma, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Alma Alexander, otherwise known as the Duchess of Fantasy, hence the headgear. I am a fantasy slash science fiction writer who's got more than 20 published books under my belt, which you can all find at my website's book table. Once I'll tell you about that at the conclusion of the panel. I taught myself to read aged 4, and I haven't quit since. And I'm basically influenced by a whole heap of people and works. And I'm just going to start things out by saying that I went for a long time saying that when I grow up, I want to be Ursula Le Guin. I'm all grown up and I'm not, so that went by. But we'll talk about that.
Flash?
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Burke, better known as Flash. You can find me on authorstephanieburke.online. I don't remember that. And I have about 100 books under my belt. I write in erotica, paranormal, fantasy, high fantasy, LGBTQ issues. You name it, I've probably done it. And I can't wait to get over here to tell everybody the negatives and the positives of authors when I write that forced me into writing.
Frank?
My name is Frank W. Butterfield, and I write gay mystery, romance, and adventure novels. I've got 96 so far, and I'm really happy to be here. I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say about this.
Layla.
I am Layla Dorine. I write LGBTQ fiction and romance, heavy on the biker boys, rocker boys, wolf shifters, dragon shifters. You name it. We've even got rhinos. We are working on goats. We are trying to come up with every shifter possible. I've even got a ferret. But my first job was actually a bookstore. So talk about getting to pick and choose through books. I am currently working on my 38th book, which seems really small considering some of the others, but I'll catch up eventually. I'll get there.
And Alex.
I am the pan-librarian wizard, Alexander Gideon, and my writing can best be summed up by the phrase, and many people died. Shut up, Jim. I'm the author of the Books of the Law, which is historical fantasy loosely based around the wickedest man in the world, Aleister Crowley's actual life. I just make the magic a bit more tangible and his life a little bit more believable, because searching for King Arthur's sword in a labyrinth created by Merlin while fighting minotaurs, much more believable than his actual life was. I'm also the author of the Wayfaring Strangers books, which is my supernatural sci-fi, very cosmic, about the formation of an accidental pantheon, because nothing in the universe happens for a reason. I also write in horror. I have romance coming out next year. I've got spicier romance coming out next year. I've got it, you name it, I write in it. And in terms of things that influence me, I just have some visual representations here, just of some books that, as Flash said, made me write.
Well, every heavy reader at some point in time goes through that phase of saying, well, I can go write a book. But then realistically, you get into that point of finishing that first one is always a challenge. But, for those of us who actually do crank out a fair amount of work, it's not because you necessarily have a choice. It's because you have to, right? It's just you got it. If you don't get it out, it's coming out one way or the other. So Alma, what was that first book for you, which is that moment you said, oh, I need to write?
You know what? I don't know. I started reading when I was 4, and I read everything and anything in between. I started reading mythology of all stripes and the original fairy tales, and by that I mean the non-Disneyfied version, the ones where people, chopped off their heels to fit into glass slippers as opposed to other ways around. So I suppose that explains a lot. But the thing is, I started reading all this stuff that was not real, and I fell in love with non-reality in that kind of sense. So that's where I just headed by instinct. And when I grew up a little bit, I discovered more fairy tales that I didn't know about, which was the Oscar Wilde versions. And if you haven't read the Oscar Wilde fairy tales, take a box of tissues and go read The Nightingale and the Rose, because you're going to start weeping by the second rose bush and you won't stop. The thing about those things is that what I kind of learned is that writing is savage, and I enjoy it. It's just one of those things that, like you said, Jim, it's like if you have the story will out. And what actually gets poured into your head, like from some sort of celestial reservoir, those beginning ideas kind of shape the stories that won out to begin with. And then of course I segued into things like Tolkien by almost accident. And then Tolkien basically showed me what could be done, how to create a world from the ground up. And that's when I really fell into it, like head first, and never came out again. But I have to say that I wrote that first novel that you speak of when I was 11. So yeah, it wasn't very good, but I was 11 to my credit. I wrote my first good novel when I was 14. But the thing is, by that stage, I'd read enough, but I hadn't even begun reading. So I don't know what actually pushed me into it or influenced me. I'm just going to say I fell in love with the word when I learned such a thing existed. And I've been in a relationship ever since.
All right, Flash. What was that book which was the moment that it pushed you over the edge and said, well, I've got to go do this too?
It's so negative. I started reading at 4-2, and when you're that little, you can get to places where your parents really don't want you to go. So I found my mother's stock of Harlequin romances.
Oh, God.
I was reading those and going, oh, wow. Why does my stomach feel like this? Okay, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going until I read all of hers. So I grew up, romance was the first thing that I actually started doing. And it wasn't until I was in 11th grade. I was reading Rosemary Rogers' Sweet Savage Love. I cannot tell you how many times I flung that book against the wall because it was so asinine and stupid and just wrong. And I was like, this can't be what it can't be everything. Excuse me, fighting allergies. So I was like, okay, Stephanie, let's sit down and think about this. There's nobody that looks like me in any of these books. So I think my second read was sci-fi, and I think I picked it up. It was A Wrinkle in Time. And that was one of the few books that gave me nightmares. And it was all about the kid bouncing the ball and catching it and getting shot. What scared me was, damn, anybody who's different is going to get messed up in this world. So there was that little bit of aspect because my parents taught me to think, but sci-fi kind of showed me how to think, if that makes sense. It showed me the possibilities and things that could be in order to put them in. So I was juggling my sci-fi and then my romantic sci-fi and paranormal romances, and they were great. Until I came across, like I said, Rosemary Rogers. And the second one, when my friends were telling me calm down, was a book by Cassie Edwards. I can't remember the name of that darn book. And it's sad because I just threw it away yesterday. It was just basically pages and a little bit of glue because that book hit the wall so many times and I would literally throw it. It was, somebody actually didn't do the Putnam Squares. Somebody did not do high school science. because she had this one guy who was full Native American. And this is taking place in, good old antebellum town. So she has a Native American man who's full-blood Native American, a white guy who is so white he named his son like Chad. The third one, seriously, but the third thing was the daughter he begot on the slave. And I mean, he described her as being dark as night without the stars. If she closed her mouth and her eyes, you wouldn't see her in the dark. He over and over about how dark this woman was, and then how the master of the house kind of fell in love with his house slave. She was the only dark-skinned house slave that was there, and she gave birth to his daughter, and he already had a wife and another family, and her brother was trying to do some nasty things to her when she was little. But here's the thing. She grew up to have green eyes and blonde hair. Okay. 2 out of those 3 got melanin, the third don't. That's not how science works. That's not how any of this works. And the last throw against the wall that was like, yes, you can do this and you can do this 100 times better, was that the Native American and the half-caste, as they call her, black girl, got together and had a blue-eyed, blonde-hair baby.
What? Oh!
Last time I picked up a Cassie Edwards book, I threw it against the wall so much, like I said, and I kept it. And I kept it so I can say, I will never write this poorly. And I hate to say that about a fellow author, but you need to basic science,
Hey, I'm a molecular biologist by training and a geneticist by training. I'm listening to you and I'm going,
no, that's not how this works. But I kept that as a souvenir to remind me, no matter how bad I think my writing is, it'll never be as bad.
And thus comes the number one reason that most people start writing is I can't be that bad, and that got published.
That's what James Tuck's beginning story is. He read this book that was supposed to be like the grittiest, just like nasty, and he read it and he was like, "This sucks. I can write better." And then he wrote Deacon Chalk, and correct, yes, he can.
So, Frank, what was your starting point?
Well, I didn't start writing until I was 49. When I moved here to the beach, something happened with the water, the sand. I don't know what it is. But I'd been reading for years and years and years, and I read Tolkien. I'd read the complete trilogy of Lord of the Rings probably 40 times by the time the movies came out, which made me a very unhappy person sitting in the movie theater and irritating all my friends. I was like, that would never happen. That's not what he said. That's not how that works.
Thank you.
Because I could quote the dialogue from the books pretty much. And so, but another book that I read over and over again was Gaudy Night by Dorothy Sayers. And I was introduced to her when I was about 21 or 22 as kind of like an alternative to Agatha Christie, which now in retrospect is like, no, but there's Agatha Christie and then there's Dorothy Sayers, and they're not really the same. They don't kind of exist in the same world, even though they're writing for the same time and they're, but Dorothy Sayers is for me, and this informs a lot of my writing, she's like a chronologist, not realizing what she's doing, I don't think, of exactly what was happening in the time that she's writing. And she writes specifically for her audience and doesn't explain lots and lots of things, which is one of my favorite things about her stuff. So there's this montage kind of chapter or sequence in one of the chapters in one of her books where she's trying to show the passage of time, and she puts all these I can't even really compare it to anything that I've ever come across. It's just like a series of things that happened in the summer of 1927 or 28 in London that are that anybody living at the time, reading the book at the time it came out, would have known exactly what she was talking about. But now there's entire websites devoted to decoding all of her the little things she drops into the stories. And that's one of my favorite things. And that's what I do. I write historical fiction mostly. I write some contemporary, but in the historical fiction, I try to write as though it's being written for a contemporary audience of the time in which the story occurs. And I try not to over-explain too much. And one of my favorite things I've ever heard is when people tell me they have to like have Wikipedia open while they're reading one of my books. I'm like, yes, I've achieved my goal. Because I want that, like, to me, that pulls you into that time and into the place. So the inspiration from her was writing. The other thing I love about Dorothy Sayers is that she never really wrote. This is really hard to describe, but to somebody then it would not have made sense. To us now, I think it makes a lot more sense. She wrote kind of like to make money and not really professionally, but she had gone to Somerville and Oxford. She was a graduate and had taken a B.Lit, and she had the chops. But then when she kind of had done whatever she wanted to do in like 10 books, she dropped it and then started writing for the church, essentially. And that's what she did for like the last 15 years of her life. But she also was like writing about these things in a very matter-of-fact way. Another thing that I really love about her stuff is that she wrote about like a lesbian couple who's part of like this murder mystery. And she's very matter-of-fact about it in a way that Agatha Christie kind of sort of did the same thing, but not in the same way where like, this is just how these people are living their lives, and they're very obvious and very clearly, that's who they are. But she doesn't explain them, and she doesn't try to like denigrate them or like put them in a certain corner. It's just matter of fact. But so that's because the historical fiction, that's where that comes from. But writing gay characters comes from a book that I read by J.B. Sanders called, and I had to write everything down because I'm really bad with names and titles and stuff. Glenn and Tyler's Honeymoon Adventure. And this book, I was in El Paso. I got the audiobook and I was going to Daytona Beach. And I got so pulled into the story that I actually was stopped at a checkpoint between El Paso and San Antonio. And the dog thought I had like drugs in my car. And I was led to like into this little place where there was somebody with a machine gun standing over me. And I was so in the story, I didn't even really notice that I almost got arrested until I was like halfway down the road, like 5 or 10 miles later. I was like, oh, wait, they had a gun and like they were going to arrest me. Like, I'm like, because I was in the story so much. And that story has really informed a lot of what I write. And I'm really happy to say that I'm friends with the author and have been able to like go back and forth and talk to him about what he was doing and why he wrote the way he did. But those are the two that really, really informed me. Tolkien, to me, like because I'm writing, like I said, I have 96 books and they're all in the same universe. So I feel like I'm writing a big, huge, gigantic tome that goes across, particularly this one couple, their lifetime from like 1947 to 2008, where in all told, it'll probably be about 50 or 60 books about them and their lives, their life together and being in love with each other and all the things that happen. And to me, every now and then, I would never possibly compare myself to Tolkien, but every now and then I feel like that range, I get inspired. That came from Tolkien. Be able to read like thousands of years of history. And I wanted to just put into like two gay men in their lifetime where everything changed dramatically from when they first got together to when they died, because they died the day after they get married, which they've been wanting to do since the beginning of the relationship. So anyway, that's where I'm.
No, you wouldn't create tragedy at all. So
Dark romance.
So Layla, how about you? Where did you get your inspiration, that nudge over the edge?
Well, I was pretty much an only kid on a military base. So if the weather was bad on Guam during rainy season, you've got nothing to do but read. So I blew through everything in the house that my parents had. I was into Stephen King. Like I was reading since I was 4 too. I started writing poetry when I was about 7 or 8. My mom still has a collection of some of the most god-awful poetry you will ever see in your life. Just little kid poems. But then we were at this thrift store. And I mean, I'd gone through their Stephen King. I'd read Dune, didn't quite understand it, but I'd read it all by the time I was 11. I'd gone through pretty much everything in the house. And I was in this thrift store, and I was finally finding books that were like more my age range. And I came across The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton and absolutely fell in love with the book. And it was the same year that Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction came out. I have a thing for a bad boy. You know, I have a thing for a bad girl too, but I love leather. I love all of that culture. And I started reading the book. And at 11 years old, I was so mad, just so furious that they killed two of my favorite characters near the end that I sat down and wrote my first book when I was 11. And it was pretty much outsider fan fiction with a completely different ending. And yes, I was already writing it as MM when I was rewriting the whole thing. But I've always loved to read. I had a teacher in high school that gave us an assignment to write our own version of the Inferno after we'd read the Inferno. So you read the Inferno, you went through all of that, but then instead of just discussing the book and moving on, we had to write our own, like that was our term paper, and we had to write our version. And we had to be able to like show why we'd put these different characters on these different realms and you know, our rationale behind what our sins were and what we were calling sins, which caused me to delve deeper into other things. So here I come the next year as a senior in high school and decide, okay, I am not picking one of these books off of this stupid list of stuff that I've read when I was in elementary school. I want to do something different. So my senior year term paper for that English class was Death as Comprehended and Contrasted by the Poetry of Jim Morrison and Dylan Thomas. I went and found all 3 volumes of Morrison's books, started reading Norman L. Brown because both read him, started reading Kerouac, who I'd never heard of before, which led me to Ginsberg and a few other people. And then I started reading, it was a philosopher, and then I started reading Nietzsche. And I was like, okay, you know, all of this is going into this book with the poems and breaking down the undertones of like how they're looking at death and this stuff in there. And even in my romance, my bad boys have a little bit of a darker undertone. My first book that was actually published is probably the darkest ugly cry thing that I've ever written. Somebody somehow stuck it into romance. It is not. It has a happy for now, barely, okay, I'm talking to you, but only after like this burned down, this person died. We did a cross-country odyssey, lost 2 more people, and, you know, somebody almost jumped off a roof. It's not a pretty book. And my current romance has lightened up since then because I actually didn't read romance until I was an adult. Until I was actually a mom to my first kid and was kind of sitting in an office one day, and I got my hands on a paranormal romance, and that's what sucked me in. And then somebody gave me the first Anita Blake book, and that really sucked me in. And I started just, okay, I've got my shifters, I've got this, and I do have contemporary, but I love me. Give me leather and change into an animal, and I am a happy girl.
Stay away from Yu-Gi-Oh.
Oh,
You ever notice the bondage gear he's wearing?
ouch. You should see some of the bondage gear in this room.
Yu-Gi-Oh is like 80% of my style. Those boots that Yugi wore on, I've got some like buckle like heeled shoes over here, and I'm like, yeah, they're my Yugi shoes. Absolutely. Boy had the drip.
So, Alex, what pushed you over the edge? What brought you into the world from reader to writer?
So, you know, I was just reading Flowers in the Attic and was like, this is exactly where no.
That explains so much.
So this is my buddy, and he's going to sit with me for the rest of this little thing because he likes hanging out with me when I'm writing.
So in terms of, you know, I talk on a lot of panels and a lot of things about how much has influenced me, because when you look at my arms, I've got my book arm and I've also got my video game arm, because game story really influenced me as well. But in terms of books, Tolkien and Harry Potter, I am a millennial, is really what kind of like started me. And Tolkien definitely just with that width of history and everything. And the only story that I have to tell, which I'm actually finally writing the first book because I do actually feel good enough of a writer to do it justice as I want to, is one that has been in my head for 20 years. It is my giant centuries, millennia spanning epic fantasy that will tie into other things. And that's the only story that I have to write. But it was this series. It was David B. Coe's Lon Tobin Chronicle, which first book was Children of Amarid. And I came to writing not for stories. Story came after. I came to writing because I wanted to make characters. And if you've been on any panels of David's about character, you'll know that that is the most important thing to him. And I definitely agree with him that your story doesn't matter if I don't care about your character. Your character, it's one of the reasons why I have such a hard time with Grimdark, is that those characters, I either hate them or can't know they're going to die, ergo I don't want to get attached. And I can't read anything I don't want to get attached to characters on. And so it is just not for me because of that. But yeah, it was Lon Tobin because I read them in third grade. And I kind of started doing some character development in fifth grade. And funny enough, it was because it was with my friend Daniel, and we made our own little game, and it was Yu-Gi-Oh! That really got us into. It's so funny that you mentioned that. But in sixth and seventh grade, absolutely horrible. But then again, who of us had a good middle school history? But sixth and seventh grade were the worst of my entire school life, and it felt like everyone in my life was a bad person or was treating me badly, especially with everyone that I knew at school. And something that David has said about the characters in Lon Tobin is that he felt like they were too good, you knew they were going to do the right thing. And I've told David about that I definitely, now as an author, I get why that would bother you, but at the same time, that is the reason why it was my favorite series, and it still is, because his characters are so fantastic that Jared and all of those characters feel like your friends, and they're going to do the right thing. And sometimes we just need something in our life where we go, this is a good person. They are always a good person. I have no doubts that they will ever not be a good person. And in sixth and seventh grade, that's what I needed out of a character. I needed to be able to go to these books, and I read them over and over and over because they felt like the friends I didn't have. They felt like the people in my life that I could look to and go, that's who I want to be. That's the kind of person that I, want to be. And so I started with characters first, making characters that I enjoyed, would want to read, and then story came from there.
So let's actually talk a little bit more about influences, right? Because we've got those fundamental influences, that first story that pushes us over the edge, whether it's often, and again, I can't tell you how many writers I know that started because it was the rage of how bad something they were reading was. But again, the other side of that has to be, going back to Alma's point, you've got to have the love of the written word. You've got to have the love of story and character, and have those things that you have to bring to life, not only for yourself, but for others. So Flash, you started by talking about a couple of your major influences between romance and sci-fi. What's another work that still influences you to today? If there's one book, one work that kind of has some influence on the stuff that you're doing today, what's one of them, and how does it kind of influence what you're doing?
Man, there's so many of them. That's kind of hard.
Well, nobody ever said I was here to ask the easy questions.
I mean, right, I'm injured. Be nice to the crippled lady, okay? But that was a really positive influence on me. Man, Okay. I would have to say Planet of the Cave Bear.
Mm.
Because before then I wrote a whole story when I was 13 and turned it into my science teacher, and my English teacher, and she said, "This is a great story, Stephanie, but do your people eat?" Yes. Do they sleep? Yes. Where? You have them going straight. You need to give them a break. And I was like, well, okay. And that was some of the best advice you could give me. But my mother, when I was like way before that, I was like 10. My mother walks in. No, I was 14 or 15. And my mom comes in and tosses me this huge book and says, maybe this will control your reading a little bit so you won't be going through everything. All right. I started reading, and it was The Valley of the Horses. This is the book that a 12-year-old should not be reading. But it was more of the burning sensation in the pit of my stomach type of thing. And I was like, oh, so that's how it's done, and that's how I'm supposed to feel. So I had to go and get the first book because I wanted to know what it was all about. That first book was amazing. It had, situations that you're trapped in when you're the fish out of water. It had assault. It had warriors. It had history. It had I wouldn't say paleontology. Well, yeah, a bit. But it was anthropology. Everything is in this book, including how she explained religions and how they moved on. But in the Planet of the Cave Bear, it was so sad. I cried so many times taking this trip with Ayla, from being picked up by these people who don't understand her, and she doesn't understand them, because they're what the people were calling the others. And they were like Cro-Magnon man. And she was like, Homo sapien. And they found her, they raised her, they went through the totems and everything. She started talking about, Pangea and how that started shifting and cracking up. But she told that story so beautifully. And I felt so bad because, like I said, I was the lone kid. Leave her alone. She might fight you, but other than that, you can, make fun of her. She'll probably shout back at you. Fun for everyone. But reading this, some of the emotions I felt when I felt cut adrift from everything, and I felt exactly how she felt, that trapped feeling. And then how she turned something that was negative into a positive, and it ended on a negative. But in the end, she had set up humanity for the next thing. But from the time she was a child growing up, people misunderstanding her. The language is not like you're speaking two different languages, like, parents and kids. And a lot of analogies like that I found in her book. And I read that book so much, 2 paperbacks fell apart. So I went and got a hardback, and the hardback fell apart. So I have the whole series. The last book, I was kind of mad because I waited like 20 years for this darn book, and it was okay. But other than that, the way she wrote, the matter-of-fact way she carried things, sex wasn't something to be ashamed of or afraid of. A naked body was just a naked body. There were no real races. It was, what do you know? And what do you look like? If you're 6 feet tall, I want to have a kid that's 6 feet tall too, because that gives them an edge when they're hunting and things. So all this is wrapped up in this book. All of this stuff is explored, and I just dove right in, and I felt like I was part of her. When a story makes you feel like you need to walk down the street and hold conversations with the characters, then you know that that's a book that just will never leave your heart. So yeah, I'd really have to say that one. And it was powerful stuff, and things definitely was not meant for children. But there you go. I think that kind of helped shape me and push me more towards the erotic side of things and romance. My first romance book, I didn't know it was erotica. I was like, is this the way people have sex? No, it's the way I have sex. We don't need to know that, okay? My first book, what do I know? I'm talking about things that I know. So yeah, they can influence you in the weirdest of ways.
How about you, Frank? What's one that really kind of helped set a through line for you?
Well, I want to go back to something you kind of mentioned when I was talking earlier. and it's connected to the question you're asking. In the books that I'm writing, particularly that have to do with my central characters, Nick and Carter, there's no tragedy. Because history is tragic, but personal lives are rarely tragic. If you go through the entire scope of a lifetime, it's rarely tragic. There are times that it really suck and really bad shit happens, but it's not tragic unless it's part of historical span. So talking about gay men in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s is supposedly a tragic story, but that's part of what I'm trying to write. Is it's not. It's tragic if you think about it as the thing that happened June 7th of 1982 that really sucked. Yeah, that's very tragic, and there's a lot of sadness and people dying and all that. But when you have lives that span a long period of time, it's not tragic. And one of the things that really inspired me, in fact, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, because this is when I saw the title of this panel, this was what immediately came to me, was all the books I've read in the 80s and 90s up into the 2000s, all the gay books I picked up at the different gay bookstores, San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C., in Austin, and every one of them is about somebody dying that's very sad, over and over and over and over again. And it was very hard to find any happy stories except in mysteries. And there were a handful of gay mysteries being written or being published. I'm sure there were more being written. But even and it doesn't apply to all the mysteries either, because there's Henry Rios. So it's one tragedy after another, after another, after another. But I wanted to write a story where here are these reasonably happy people having reasonably happy lives that have interesting things happen to them along the way, but it's not tragic. And even in the things that happen that are really sad, it's not tragic, it's just sad. Because it seems to me that the history of, I can't speak for anybody else, but the history of gay men in the 20th century is supposed to be sad. And I find it to be incredibly powerful and uplifting and liberating. So I just wanted to get that out there, because I think that's really important. And until I just said that, I hadn't realized how much that really does move what I'm doing. But that said, there's another book that I didn't mention, but that I was thinking about as, particularly as Flash was talking, a book called Dancer from the Dance, which was written by Andrew Holleran. And it was written in the late 70s. And when I first moved to New York City in 87, I went to the Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookstore on Gay Street, and it was one of that book and The Lost Language of Cranes were the two books that I bought, having no idea that I just picked up two incredibly important gay stories. And with Lost Language of Cranes, it's very sad and tragic. Very, very, very sad. You'll just cry and cry and cry and cry. But the thing about Dancer from the Dance is it's almost unintelligible. The way it's written is it's written kind of in circles and in spirals. It's not straight. There's not a straight narrative. It's not he said, she said, they said, we did this, we did that, we ate. It's nothing like that. It's very circuitous. And it's a story about the 70s in New York City, a time that even by 1987 was gone. And about these two characters and they're kind of intertwining lives with each other. But it's also incredibly hilarious and very poignant and very sad at the end. But by the same token, it's this way of talking about a story that I think is unique to, that I think he really captured, that's really unique to the way that gay men talk about their stories with each other. And that's part of what inspires me, because I want to be able to in the same way that to me, Dorothy Sayers is writing about Britain that of course is long gone, the Britain between the wars. That's when she was writing, and that country doesn't exist anymore. I wanted to write about the thing that doesn't exist anymore, the gay men who were living on the edge or had to kind of hide who they were, and how they had enclaves where they could be completely immersed in their culture and be completely safe within this small group of people compared to the larger city that surrounded them. And in Holleran's book, he writes about that, not specifically, but he gave me the inspiration to think about those things and to see them in my own life, because it was one of the first books I read as a gay man. And the more I write, the more I realize that's actually what I always want to write about, is like this secret story that nobody else sees unless you actually know about it. You would never know it was there because it's not part of what we talk about outside of our own group. And you have to have the experience, you have to have the lived experience to actually know that it existed. And also, since we don't pass down cultural history from parent to child to parent to child, it's the stories that we have to tell each other that get passed along, because people get old and they die, or they die too young, and then we don't know everything and we lose some of it, but then people kind of fill in the differences. And there's all these stories that happen that I just wanted to write down these little vignettes about how life was. It's not that way anymore, but I wanted to write about how life was, and that it wasn't tragic. It was just interesting and amazing and full of life. Anyway, sorry, I kind of went off the track there, but Andrew Holleran does that to me. Like, I can't speak in straight lines anymore. I'm like going around in a circle. But that book, Dancer from the Dance, I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. Even if you have no interest in gay life of New York in the 70s, it's not really about that. It's about something else completely different, because it's just a masterful storytelling.
And I'm going to poke you for a little bit, Frank, because there are some groups of people who aren't still natural storytellers who are passing the information down from mother to child, especially in the Black community, because I know stories of who they said, when they said it, and what happened to them. And a lot of it was cautionary. So I guess it depends on your lifestyle when you say, or your life, when you say not everything.
Oh, no, that what I meant specifically is gay men. We don't do that, because we're not, I mean, in my family, stories get passed down. My mother's an amazing storyteller, and I know a lot of stories about like my ancestry, but that's about, to be quite blunt, that's about straight white people. It's not about gay men. And so when we lose our stories because we die and we don't have, this has changed. This isn't really the case as much anymore. But we lost a lot of stories because there's no evolution like what you're saying. It's lost. And so to me, what I want to do is I want to write about some of those things that I think were lost, that I'm pulling out of thin air, that nobody's ever told me, but they just make sense to me as a story. So no, yeah, I mean, yeah, parent to child is the natural flow of storytelling. But when you have a community like this, where there's no, gay parents don't have gay children, necessarily. And so the culture doesn't get passed along except like in certain, like, non-obvious kinds of ways. If that makes any sense.
With us, especially in my family and the people I grew up around with, gay, straight, it doesn't matter. A lot of gay stories have also been passed down because we are a community who had to create our own, we had to make our own wagon because nobody else was letting us in their circles. So we had to create our own circles. So, I mean, when you talk to people, you get some of the most interesting things that you wouldn't expect to be such an extraordinary thing until you start digging. And with our family and a lot of Black families, these things are passed down because it's habit, because we couldn't read, we couldn't write, we were killed for that. So in essence, like I do a panel called One Planet, Two Worlds, but it's multiple worlds. It's one planet with multiple worlds. Sometimes they bump up against each other, and then that's your choice to even open up and allow that person in or to shut them down, and later or never. So, I mean, when you look at it that way, just about every group of people on this planet has a clique. I get exactly what you're talking about because there's not enough gay representation. And there's a lot of families, like you said, that will shy away from it. Not everyone, but a good number of them. But it depends on where you're at. It depends on who you are, where you were raised, how you were raised. It matters your ancestry and the things that happened to you in the past. A lot of it is we've had so much dirt done to us that we're not usually the ones to start doing it. And you get a lot of compassion when you're beat down like that constantly and constantly and constantly. But I get what you're saying too, but you can't use a blanket statement because, everybody has their own way of retaining histories in life. So, I mean,
Well, part of the other thing that inspires me about that is that when I first moved to San Francisco, which is where a lot of my stuff is based in, I was part of a group of guys who were all had AIDS, and they all knew they were dying, and they just didn't know what else to do. And it was kind of like, it was called the Healing Circle. And I got there. There were probably 200, 300, 400 people of this group who would come and go. By the time I left, well, actually, probably by about 95, this started in 89, they were all dead. There were probably about 10 of us still alive. That's part of what I'm talking about also, because their stories, I almost sometimes feel like their ghosts are sitting on top of me, of like saying, we need you to tell the stories that we didn't get to tell anybody because we left too soon. And there was no reason to tell the story because we didn't think it was that important. But now we realize it's really important because it's all lost. That's kind of what I'm talking about. That's more of I don't mean blanket, it's always this way. I just mean that's what I'm tapped into, and that's what's inspired me. So,
gotcha.
Well, and I think that goes back to the importance of storytellers, right? Even if it is a fiction, it contains a lot of truths. It contains a lot of history. It contains that experience that, and this is the reason a lot of the time I'll talk about the notion of reading and writing as a co-creation experience, because the writer, no matter what you do, every reader is going to take it a little bit differently, or sometimes hugely differently, through their lenses, their experience, and everything else. So that I agree is part of the reason that for doing a show like this, to talk about what are the influences that came through as to why you tell the stories that you do. Because again, we're all building on the storytellers that came before us, both the ones that were in print and publication, as well as the family storytellers, the family lineage, the family histories, because all of that makes its way into the work, whether we know it or not. So, go ahead, Flash.
I was just going to say the things that you're most familiar with, the things that you live through, almost always wind up in your book, because you're using your emotions, your experience, and how you view the world to imbue these characters with these wonderful characteristics. So I do think, yes, that's exactly right. You 100% right. There's a lot of stories going on, and a lot of history is being lost, and it's sad. And a lot of it is being purposefully hidden, which is also sad. Which means, man, I don't know how long we're going to be able to write before they start coming at us and rattling things for the evil books we write. So I'm just waiting for it so I can sit back and smile.
Look, it's still on my bucket list to have something that hits the banned book list. So
I have a banned book.
Oh, which
Which one?
Congratulations.
Thank you. It actually came out of left field. Somebody emailed me and said, "Did you know that Florida banned your book?" And I'm going, "Florida, what now?" They kind of picked up this self-avowed young adult fantasy, which I have no clue what they could find objectionable in there, but somehow they ended up in a banned book together with things like Isabel Allende and Neil Gaiman and 5 dictionaries.
Wow.
They banned my book in 5 dictionaries. So
Wow.
just there you go.
Were I you, I would put that in the biggest letters on the cover of a new
I
edition.
actually made a poster that had the cover of the book in big red letters, "Now banned in Florida."
Oh yeah, I'd have banned in Florida right under my name on the book. Like, let's
then-
re-edition this.
The badge of honor, yeah.
And then text this with a question mark. Because you know what's coming.
So yeah, that's when you make a Florida only cover too, just for.
Yeah.
So Layla, what's another story that has been really influential for you going forward?
It's actually another S.E. Hinton book, and it's Taming the Star Runner, which is not one of the top 4 that everybody knew. I'm a Gen Xer, so Scholastic Book Fair, you got that, and I mean, I would do every chore in the house, cook any meal I could think of, because it wasn't enough to blow my bookstore paycheck. I had to, but my room is a haven of books. That's all that's pretty much in the space, is books and toys that amuse me. I am just a heavy reader, and I'm a book hoarder. I have the books from when I was a kid. I have books that teachers used to take from me. And my mom would come in at the end of the quarter and they'd hand her back a couple stacks, and she'd come home. Will you stop putting your books inside your textbooks and reading them? Well, I've already read the flippin' textbook in the first quarter. What am I supposed to do for the rest of the year in this stupid class that I did all my homework for, so I can have all this free time for the rest of the year? I'm bored. So yeah, I'm sitting there reading because they got, we're sitting here supposed to be reading this in class, and I'm bored. I've read the book already. My whole Robotech series got taken from me, the paperbacks for Robotech. And I went through a lot to get my hands on those, let me tell you. This teacher just kept taking them. I'm like, I'm never going to finish the story. She doesn't stop stealing my books. But for some reason, S.E. Hinton and Jim Morrison have always been, like, I was a musician before even I was an author. I played in a metal band. I wrote songs. My high school math paper, that brown scratch paper that they gave you to do your math problems on, I don't think I ever did a math problem on that brown scratch paper, but I filled hundreds of those pages with song lyrics. And I mean, just notebooks and pages, and they'd be falling everywhere. They'd be falling out of my locker. My best friend, who was also a musician, he'd stick partial lyrics, fold them up into those little triangles and stick them through the slots of my locker. And I'd finish writing them and stick them back in his locker, and we'd write songs that way throughout our school day. We just drop those squares in each other's locker and write the songs, and then go home and play them with our band. So with Taming the Star Runner, it stuck to me more than even Tex, which I loved Tex because the horses, I'm a huge animal lover, and the horses and everything. And Taming the Star Runner is about this horse that nobody can ride. He's kind of been abused. He's had these issues. And this teenage boy, who I was about the age of at the time, and he'd messed up. He'd accidentally burned the house down. His mother had been killed in the fire. And it was all because it was her birthday. And he had wanted to give her a cake. He'd gotten this cupcake. He had saved it from school, and it was kind of mushy and falling apart. And he'd started sticking candles in, and he was trying to hold it up for her to the window when she pulled in, and it lit the curtains on fire. And she saved him and his brother, but she passed away. And he was just racked with this guilt over what had happened, and trying to do how you can try to do such a beautiful, good thing and have it go so horribly wrong. And just, it resonated with me because I had, my friends and I, we were the metalheads, we were the skater kids, we were outcasts. And I saw more than once friends of mine who just tried to do such not kind things, such beautiful things, only to have someone just crap all over them for trying to do something awesome. And between that and the book, and then reading Morrison's poetry, where he's just diving into the imagery, for me, it's always been the imagery and the play of words with him. That's what really started me on my writing journey. Like, that's what really got me to sit there and tell redemption arcs. Almost all of my stories have some sort of a redemption arc in it, some sort of a misunderstood character, a character who, like Hank, one of my biker guys, is just this gruff, comes across as like the meanest person you will meet. And he's a giant teddy bear. He's just not someone who's just going to let everybody in. And you kind of see, even in his book, and that's probably my most romance, even he gets a little bit of a redemption story mixed in there. And so that's kind of where my influence has always been, even when I was a kid. And I mean, I've gone my way. My early writing was horror. And most people look at that now and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. So not under the name I publish under now, but my first 200 pieces of art and poetry and short stories and flash are horror and dark fantasy. And I actually used to run a dark fantasy horror magazine back in the when my youngest child, who's about to turn 21, was just being born. I was running that, and I mean, we were the creepiest of creepy, dark, exploring the underbelly of the creepy crawlies, and not just what humans do, but like looking at those old, like Alma mentioned earlier, looking at those non-Disneyfied fairy tales and the Grimm's grimmiest, the original tales, and drop me in a library and do not come back for me until it closes, because I will devour everything I can get my hands on and start cross-referencing and following the bibliographies in the back and what did this person read to get where they got, because I will track that back and find those old stories and then read them and reimagine them into, you know, whatever it is that I happen to be working on. So for me, I guess it was just those books and a love of research.
Alex, how about you? What's another one that really has had a major influence for you?
If if anyone on this panel or watching has read this book, send me a DM because we need to be friends. A book that really shaped so much of my writing style, also with how I write a lot of characters, a lot of the humor that is within it in those sparse moments, is a book by William R. Forstchen, Arena, and that is Magic the Gathering Arena. It was the very first Magic book. In my opinion, the best Magic book. It's phenomenal. And you can read it standalone, not have to know anything about the game, know anything else. It has its own conclusion. You don't have to read anything else. But because it was based around the game, he really takes the Magic like system, because I mean, Magic the Gathering, the whole point of the game is you are a planeswalker. These are your spells, and your lands are where you pull your mana from. Like, that is the basic of the game. And you're facing another planeswalker, and this is an entire magical duel where you're summoning creatures and throwing lightning bolts and everything, because it was originally inspired by D&D. But the way he wrote the Magic and the back and forth between all of these casters, and the way he incorporated the land and mana as these little bundles of earth that they kept in a satchel, and so that they could pull the mana from, and their spells were amulets and these kinds of things that they would use. And like, if you don't know the game, you go, this is a really cool Magic system. And if you know the game, you're like, this is a really cool way to represent that. And like, but the book was dark. Like, I mean, Magic has never, people are like, it's a kid's game. I'm like, it is the most complicated game ever created in history. Try to get your 12-year-old to know how to actually play it. And
they did not shy away from the dark on the cards.
No.
I'm an old school type 2, like, take me back to 3rd edition Magic player. So
I mean, if you guys have ever, it pops up every once in a while, and it's an art, and it's this guy that's kind of like, it's like a body kind of laid down, knees are under, and it's just like skull and spine have just been removed. That's surgical extraction. That is the name of that card. Is out of New Phyrexia, cost 1 Phyrexian black. I knew that. I know it immediately because I played the crap out of that card when it first came out. By the way, I've been a tournament Magic player for 16 years.
Nice.
But in that book, it was such a great representation, and just how you had these houses that were, and they were coming together for this big festival, that, you know, with what it turns out to be, and just the way that they fought back and forth. Because at the time, Magic had an ante system where basically, like, you played someone, you anteed up a card, and if you lost, they got that card. And so in the book, if, you know, there was an official duel or something, well, somebody, you claimed whatever spell it was from your opponent. But then, of course, you know, people would steal spells from each other, and they'd kill a mage and then take their satchel to get their lands and to get their spells and get everything. I don't know why it's such a throwaway line, but there was a line in that book where it starts off Garth One Eye, who They just made a Garth One-Eye card, and I almost cried when I saw it. There's an actual Garth One-Eye card that came out like 2 years ago, and I have one framed because I was like, this book is one of the reasons why I write, and getting to see him was just amazing. But like he goes and he does this duel that wasn't actually sanctioned, and he's not part of a house, so they'll arrest him and basically kill him and take all of his stuff. And then he goes with this guy who is like, he looks like a beggar, but you definitely tell he's something more. And then he takes him back to like basically they're like hole in the wall, and it's just him like the end of the chapter, and Garth just looks around and goes, "All right, point me to which corner has the least fleas." And it was just something about that line, because it's funny, but he definitely, I mean, it's my humor. He definitely is just such a dry delivery. He was so serious about it. And like, if you read Arena and then read one of my books, you're like, I get it. Like, this is where it is. But it has that complex magic. Like, a thing that I love about that one, something that I love about a lot of Japanese anime as well, is that I want to get into the minutia of how magic works. I want you to know how this extremely complex system works, because one of my favorite tropes is this person doesn't have a lot of power. They are so damn good at using their magic that it doesn't matter, because they know it so well. And that's really what it is for Garth as well, is that he's just such a fantastic spellcaster that he gets around so many things for that. And it really was like, I want to write magic like this. Like, it was the first time I'd read something that had a more complex magic system. Even though he had one to go off of, from the game, he really made it his own. And it's fantastic fan fiction. It really is.
So Magic the Gathering was actually my accidental gateway into RPGs. I played a little D&D in high school, but when I got to college, they had something called the Norwich University Tactical Society. Now, that smells nuts, and we were. Most of us had 3 classes a day. Classes got out. Somebody's room was set up for a game, and usually there was an extra game in that little corner where you could play Magic. And we would play and play and play 2, 3 in the morning. Okay, fine. We'll go to bed because we got our 3 morning classes, and then the rest of our day is free to game. Listen,
I played the regional in Dallas last year. The region, by the way, is North America. And let me tell you about how many hours of playtesting I put in for that. You didn't know the story of how Magic came about. It's really funny, because they made the game because they had downtime at D&D conventions, like fantasy conventions. And one of the like higher ups of Wizards of the Coast was there, and is just walking down the hall from like a panel or something, and then just notices them and goes, and then just sits down next to them and watches them play for like an hour, and then goes, "I want to talk to you about this." And then they bought all of that. And Richard Garfield, one of the creators, is still fully active in R&D for them.
Nice.
So Alma, I'll come to you. We started with you. We'll end with you. So what is another book that
you want me to follow all of this?
Well, yeah. You get to be the closer. You've got to have the strongest story. No pressure.
I'm going to pull a card, so to speak, out of the pack, and I'm going to talk history. I come from a place which is built on bones. We have so much history, we don't know what to do with it. I'm from Eastern Europe, and basically from a crossroads in Europe, which every goddamn empire that ran through the place ran directly through us. We felt everything on our own backs. So, I mean, I grew up with that as a background. So to me, history has always been living in a way. It's been a part of who I was, but I'm going to circle around to that in specific, but I'm going to talk about history in two other writers that I tripped on along the way. One of them is Sharon K. Penman, who writes historical fiction, and she has a whole slew of books that cover the gamut of English history from the Conquest down to Richard Lionheart and Ottermeyer and all that. And literally, maybe she has got one or two invented characters, but the rest of the people in those books are real. They have lived, and she makes them live again. I don't know how she does this, but she creates these characters and she puts them out there, and you know them. You understand them. You suddenly start living in a history that you could have never possibly had any kind of part in. But she makes it real. She makes it alive. And when I found out recently that she died, I was like, oh, damn, there's been no more books from this wonderful writer. How could you possibly do this to me? You don't die when you write like this. You just don't. You keep on doing it. But that's one thing. And I might just say that part of the book was her so-called Welsh trilogy, which dealt with the whole history of Wales and the princes of Wales when they were still Welsh. And there were two princes called Llywelyn, both of whom I fell in love with. But basically, that's one aspect of it. I understand history, and she does too. And it was a connection that was really that deep. Another writer who none of you have probably heard of, and it connects back to what Frank said about characters. Howard Spring was an English writer who wrote, and this is not genre, he wrote mainstream books that were set in Britain somewhere between 1910 and 1950, but he kind of covered the gamut of that. His characters lived. You didn't read those books. You lived those lives. And basically, in the hands of anybody else, the minutiae, the details, the air that you breathed might have been terminally boring, but it wasn't, because you basically just got into the skin of those characters. And by the time you finished reading chapter 2, you were living that life. You were those people. It mattered fundamentally about what happened to them. When they cried, you cried. When they had a triumph, you cheered. It was just that good. And I mean, if you ever, I don't even know if he's still in print, but if you ever see a book by Howard Spring in a used bookstore, and if you're a writer and you want to know how to write character, pick one up. But circling back to my own history and the grounds on which I was born, there was a writer who actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature in his time, whose name was Ivo Andrić. And he wrote a book that you may or may not have heard of called The Bridge on the Drina. The Bridge on the Drina is a story about our people and what they lived through. And like I said, those empires that ran across that burned ground. And there was a scene in there that always makes me want to howl, because essentially what he was writing about was the era in which the Ottomans came roughshod through the area. They just used to pick up kids, little boys, stick them into panniers, stick the panniers onto horses, and take them off to become janissaries, which was the worst, most deadly troops that the Ottoman Empire ever had. But they took them from their parents, they took them from their family, they took them from their culture and their land, and they re-educated them into these kamikaze soldiers that just annihilated everything between them. And there was a scene in this book where they have just done that. They've got a bunch of these little boys in the pannier and the baskets and the horses, and their mothers are running after them on the road screaming, "Don't forget me, don't forget us, don't forget where you came from." And I just want to howl, because this is how you kill a people. This is how you destroy everything. I mean, people in that time used to take their own sons into the woods and cut off a finger or otherwise maim them so that they wouldn't be taken by the empire when they came through. They used to maim their own children to save them. Think about this. It's just that awful. And to me, the strength, the pull of history is incredibly important when it comes to writing. In my historical fantasies, the ones that I've got 3 so far, I'm working on another 1 or 2, depending on the series. They're all set in the same kind of alternate history world. But I've done a lot of reading and I've done a lot of research about these things, and half the time that you pick up something on an ear that you're looking for, and you're reading it and you're thinking, I don't believe that people ever did this to people, but you're reading historical documents, you're reading something that really happened, and the stuff people do to people, you can't even imagine it until it happens to somebody, and then you read about it in somebody's book. I mean, it doesn't just happen in a given geographical area. It happens in the child soldiers in Africa. It happens in the Cultural Revolution in China. It happened, pick a time, pick a place, pick a continent. You're going to find somebody somewhere doing unspeakable things to somebody. And in some ways, our lives are so easy. And, we're reading something like that, reading about something like that, it actually shakes the humanity in you back to a sort of core soul that says, I care about what happened to these people, even though they are not me. And I think that basically history breeds empathy because it can't not.
We have the blessing of all the struggles our ancestors went through for us to be where we are right now.
It's one of the reasons why I have said, social media, everything makes things feel so bad right now. And it's because we just know about so much. The world, we are not any worse now than we have ever been. The world has always been so full of so much goodness and horrible, horrible things in equal measure. And we only feel it's worse because we have such instant ability to know about these horrible things that happen. But they always have.
Well, and I think that really does tie up the power of storytelling, and the reason that influence is important, and the reason that the lens that we pull story through is important from the storyteller, because again, all of our experiences are different. Our motivations, our reasons for telling story are very different, but it's that ability to bring those things to life and to let other people have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great place to wrap this one up, even though we could spend a lot more hours diving into why and how we tell stories. So we'll have to do more.
I also love how Alma was like, how do I follow this up? And then just drops the hardest thing of this entire panel.
Oh, we can always count on Alma to do that. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and of course that latest thing that they need to pick up as well. So, Alma, after that mic drop, where can we find you?
Usually, I'm kind of all over the place. My website is almaalexander.org, not .com, just .org. Make sure you go to the right place. The .com one got hijacked by a Chinese dog food company. I don't ask. So that's the primary place, but usually I'm on Facebook, usually talking about my cats. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on the usual suspects of social media kind of thing. And my newest thing, which is about to drop in November, is actually fairly interesting considering this panel. It's called The Alchemy of the Word, Dreams and Transformations. And it's basically a literary memoir. And what I do is I'll take you on an intimate little tour of my house and all of my bookshelves and show you what's on them and how they've shaped me and the writer that I was. So essentially, this is the handbook to this panel. And it's coming out in November, and it will be available for pre-order kind of fairly soon. So watch my social media for details.
Flash, how about you? Where can we make sure to find you?
You can find me at authorstephanieburke.online. Please excuse the website. They changed a lot of things. It's AI, and I understand it. I'm fighting with it, but we'll get it there. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. All my information and all my deets are on the Facebook page, and you can get them on the first page of my website. One thing I have to say, is that I took a student as a writing partner, and we just completed a book, and it dropped about maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and it's called Newton's First, and it is an alternate universe, cyberpunk, paranormal mystery that falls into so many different categories. It's hard to explain it all, but just go and read it. We have androids and stuff and aliens, so just read the androids and aliens.
Frank?
My website is frankbutterfield.com. That's where you find all my books. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm kind of pulling back from social media. It's just not for whatever reason. I have 2 books in the works that were start off as 1 book, but I've had to split them up into 2. The first one is called Summer Breeze, and the second one after that will be called, and they'll be released pretty much probably.
Seals and Croft? Oh, wait.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for this series, I use they're all song titles for my books. So Summer Breeze and Dancing in the Moonlight is the second one. And Summer Breeze is actually, because the book I wrote before that one took me out of canon, because I've written from 1947 to 2008, but I keep writing in the middle of all that, and I got myself out of canon, so I had to explain why, and it took me on this wild journey. And Dancing in the Moonlight is kind of like more of that, and it will be the last book in that series, which is my contemporary series, The Romantical Adventures of Whit and Eddie. That'll be my final book in that series. So that's coming up, hopefully, sometime in October. We'll see.
Layla?
You can find me at Layla Dorine, author at Wix.com. You can find me at my blog, Rainbow Lyrics and Mellow Mushrooms, though we're a bit behind because I have a book coming out on October 22nd that I am still polishing the last 4 chapters of. So I have 2 more coming out this year, too. They're both Christmas, Daddy Little books as part of giant shared world projects. I love my group author projects, and so we have several group author projects every year. And you can find me on Insta from time to time and TikTok from time to time. I'll drop a video when I have time to create one. And in fact, anybody who's out in California, we have a Palm Springs signing coming up. It is a group, I think we have like 12, 13 of us that are going to be there. And it is all LGBTQ authors bringing you romance books. It's the first one. A friend of mine, TL Travis, has organized this and brought in just an awesome group of authors for this event. So next week I will be heading out to Arizona and then California and then back to Arizona with her because we are writing our first co-written project together, which is going to be my first Dragon Shifters that are actually going to come out, and not just the ones that exist in my little notebooks that I've never shared with anyone.
And Mr. Gideon.
So you can find me at alexandergideon.net because 2 doctors own alexandergideon.com because they bought it when they had their son, who should be round about 6 now and is going to find it really hard to market himself when he's old enough to use it. Going to be asking why he gets a lot of emails and messages for his books that he has never written. But the 2 books in my Books of the Lost series, Magic in Theory and Practice and A Hammer of Witches, are available. You can find the links there. You can also find all of my books on TikTok Shop, which will you'll be able to buy directly through me. I'm actually really enjoying using them because they streamline selling super well. I barely have to do anything rather than put something in the mail with the mailing. I'm losing the thing, but the thing
Post
that they
office?
give me. Yeah, the hell do you call the thing that goes on that you send it with? It's like the
Label?
shipping
Mailing
label.
label.
Jesus.
You word good. You word good.
Listen, I have driven 4 hours in the rain coming off of the hurricane right now to go sell eyeglass frames. I'm a little fried.
Millennials.
The Man Comes Around, which is the first of the Wayfaring Strangers, is available as well. And I am currently working on Books of the Law Volume 3, which will be With Strange Aeons. And that should be released in March of next year. So it's going to be a little ways out, but it is coming. And you definitely want to pick that up because it is going to have literally everything in it.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And we'll see everybody again soon. Go stack up those to-be-read piles. And go work on that story of yours. It's behind. You need to be working on that word count.
You know, the sad part about that word count is that it's been up to 96 at its highest, and it's been down to 70-something at its lowest. I have cut, changed, and taken so many pieces out, and now it's at 87, and I still have one more chapter that has to be written from scratch.
See, writer's life. Welcome to the writer's life.